You wanted to tell us something, Fred, about this incredible human being that we will be covering on this fine morning.
Yeah, so our particular character today, I looked for a biography that he has supposedly penned, or where he sort of talks about his own childhood, because I thought it could be fascinating. Now, he has apparently in his like Goodreads bibliography and the amount of books he's written, he has written 37 books. I was not going to sit down.
Like one does.
Yeah, I was not going to sit down and look through each one of them to figure out which one had the biography. I did look through 4 of them, and I couldn't find it, and I said, fuck this. But he supposedly does talk about his childhood, because it was referenced in, I think QAA talked about it, because, we've had Live On from them. I think they talked about it. And I think there's this other podcast, something like Gurus, like they basically go through like weird pseudoscience guru type guys. Yeah. And they talk about this as well, where when he was a kid, I think he like kind of fucking hated his parents. And that's going to start to make a lot of sense when we get into the episode. He kind of like had this feeling that like something that my parents were like, when they were telling me to do stuff, etc., wasn't right. And then he discovered Ayn Rand at a very young age.
As one does.
Yeah, and then everything clicked, and he was like, well, turns out my parents are actually demons. Like, they're horrible people. Like,
my parents think children shouldn't be starved.
Yeah.
They are the state.
And then from there, like, he got this, like, thesis in his head that every element of society that's fucked up right now, everything can be distilled to how mothers fail to raise their kids right. And he said that if you just get mothers to be responsible enough or better parents or whatever, then all the society's ills pretty much will slowly disappear.
I love when I hyper-focus on one aspect of every individual's lives as a means to explain systemic issues. Welcome to another reactionary classic. To me, but like it works.
Yeah.
To me, I have to admit, I'm trying to go back as far as I can in my life. And when I was about 15 or 16, I did slowly get dragged into the classic, probably what we should cover in some episode, the classic atheist to right-winger pipeline. I'm no longer either of those categories, but Stefan Molyneux was the first guy where I started realizing that something iffy is fucking happening. And I managed to realize it as an incredibly, and I really need to emphasize this, incredibly stupid fucking teenager, okay? The thing that he hooked me on that I was kind of low-key shocked about is this form of kind of what on the surface looked like kind of based, kind of chill men's rights activist conversations. Specifically, I remember one video talking about circumcision. And keep in mind, in my part of the world, unless you're a person of Muslim faith, circumcision is literally not a thing. Not at all.
Yeah.
And then I play this video, and he's talking about American Christians, atheists, not like, secular people, etc., intentionally. And keep in mind, this is a 15-year-old boy whose dick is growing right now, right? Literally puberty. Hearing that in America, they are running around cutting little boys like fucking foreskin off when it's not for cultural or religious reasons. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like literally losing my mind. And he hooked me. And I remember specifically watching that video and be like, that's completely right. Like everybody should have bodily autonomy and should be able to decide everything that is done to their body by themselves and not just randomly by parents, right?
Do you remember, like, at what point you realized, oh shit, there's some other stuff here going on?
When he started calling all women filthy whores who basically
classic,
that classic.
Yeah.
So you would say that he hooked you because you were an intactivist? You wanted to make sure that all little baby dicks were uncircumcised?
You didn't have to say it like that. But
I guess he was the one to introduce me to anti-fascist intactivism. And I realized that not all intactivism is anti-fascist, for I saw my eternal enemy, a fascist intactivist. We want to keep all cocks beautiful and full because that is the right of every man and woman to decide on. While what would be the fascist intactivist perspective? Oh, yes, he wants to shoot all women because that's how our cocks remain intact, basically. So it's a bit, it's slightly different. But TLDR, yes, he was, I have to admit, and before we started researching for this episode, I hadn't thought of this. And the second I thought of Stephen Molyneux that I haven't thought in a while, I remember sitting in my room on my big-ass desktop computer and watching this, and specifically watching him and being like completely mesmerized by the first video. But again, this is a slight critique to those of you who have spent a longer time in the right-wing funnel. Like this guy from a 8,000 people town in rural buttfuck nowhere Balkans saw through it at the age of 15 after watching a second video. So it's, you know.
Same with me, kind of like with, because I think we probably discovered him around the same age. And I'm also from a rural buttfuck, nowhere town in Norway. And I was like, this guy is talking to the camera, says he's like smart and has like a degree and shit. And then suddenly starts talking about like how the West is gonna fall or whatever the fuck. And that's when I was like, what do you mean, like all this like Western civilization and stuff? You're kind of losing me here. I thought you were gonna talk about like how Christians are cringe and atheists are cool.
Absolutely. He was supposed to be like critical of stuff that everybody takes for granted. So it was like in the States, nobody questions whether to go snippety snip on their kid. And he's like, guys, maybe you should think about this. And I'm like, wow, that's a fucking normal human argument. And then it just
and what's so fucking cool is that all the stuff where he says like nobody talks about this stuff. When everyone says that stuff, like a lot of people are talking about that stuff. But a dumbass kid doesn't know that. Dumbass kid who hasn't been exposed to all these debates thinks this guy's like suddenly bringing something to light that, is this like horrible injustice in society. Just like, his other thoughts about child abuse.
I would say that is kind of a recruitment tool that a lot of these fringe ideologies will present, which is the idea that they have some sort of secret knowledge. They have access to this key that will unlock all these issues that have been previously confusing you. Because like if you look at the world, that is a difficult and complex material reality. There's going to be so many moving parts. So any reasonable person looking at the complexities of the world is going to have some confusion. And when he offers this like insight, but he wraps it in this like forbidden knowledge, it can't help but be attractive to people that are guileless and are looking into these issues for the first time. And I think that's a key recruitment tactic that you're going to see all over the place.
That's why it's exceptionally important whenever you're learning about a new topic to never, ever, ever, even with this show, ever go fully and exclusively with your first impression and the first source, quote unquote, right? If you don't do that with a doctor that gives you a hardcore diagnosis and you go ask another one, you probably should with particular societal analyses, historical analysis of systems, etc., because there's a very, 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 very high chance that not only is the first source potentially quote unquote problematic, doesn't always have to be, but there's a high chance that by exploring multiple sources you can get closer to some sort of let's say more academic and intellectually sound view on a particular topic. Imagine how much would be solved, especially like almost everything that we talk about here, all of these particular individuals, how big of the meat of their community are people that were exposed to them and then just stuck to them. Never checked the potential alternative. And that is...
And this guy, he has a very powerful tool to keep that from happening, to keep you from checking any alternatives. Exactly. Because he's a fucking cult leader. Around the 2010s, a lot of guys were in their phase of their lives where they were trying to figure out the world and their place in it. At the same time, these people who often had yet to attend a profound or meaningful lecture of any sort were getting that first-time experience through YouTube lectures by so-called public intellectuals. This is how a lot of people ended up gravitating towards figures like Jordan Peterson. At the same time, Joe Rogan, who we've discussed in a past episode, was starting to take off. One of Joe Rogan's recurring guests in this period is the subject of today's episode. Here's how Joe Rogan described him in his first podcast appearance. Quote, Stefan Molyneux is a Canadian philosopher. He runs the #1 philosophy show on the internet, Free Domain Radio, and also runs a very popular YouTube channel. The best way to summarize his views is to play a clip from his review of Star Wars The Last Jedi.
And in that battle, so Luke shows up, And then like every weapon in the known universe is aimed at destroying him. This is the hatred directed at white males. And of course, he's just a projection. He's not actually there. And so the fact that projection is really there, there's a lot of frustration out there in the world. This is why I talk about race and IQ.
Iconic. Iconic. He did it like, like, dear listeners, do you understand how before his time this man was? This is all the entirety of the internet is this now. He talked like this back when people would actually look at you like you're fucking insane for putting together this particular sentence. Now in a lot of circles, saying shit like this gets you quiet tap on the back from that bro you just met, who will later get drunk and abuse his wife probably. But it's iconic. It is just visionary.
Yeah.
I have to say, visionary.
And since then, he's been banned off of various social media, but returned to Twitter after Elon Musk saw to it that his account was reinstated. A very familiar story. He is an alleged cult leader. Well, alleged is doing a lot of heavy lifting. He is a cult leader, possibly an associate of the KKK, a so-called race realist, another disciple of Oswald Spengler, it seems, a sort of less goofy and more bald Jordan Peterson. But the element about him that I want to focus on, which was publicly known at the time Joe Rogan kept having him on, but seemingly severely undercommunicated, is that Stefan Molyneux is a deeply fucking evil person. Because Stefan Molyneux unambiguously runs an actual cult. Welcome to the Reaction Podcast. This is Stefan Molyneux.
Very sexy, very nice, very BBL, very good, very nice. I have never seen a BBL in my life.
Well,
I've only seen them on the internet.
First of all, come to Southern California and you'll see one every 5 seconds.
I think that they're like all the BBLs from around the world get stolen and they get shipped to California and Dubai. Like that's where all the BBLs go. But now there's more of them in California because there's no BBLs in Dubai anymore. Yeah.
Honestly, I would if I were single like you guy like you go. You're single, right?
I'm getting married in 2 months.
Oh yeah, that's right. You just give a single guy vibe.
Basically single, like I get okay. Cause
you give a single guy vibe.
Chad, is that a compliment? I have no idea.
I forgot. See, this is just called being self-involved. But yeah, no, you should go to Brazil. I haven't been. I need to get to Latin America.
But you should go.
You should go and tell me how it is.
I would love to go to Brazil. It's literally my favorite country. Unironically, I do not believe in the inferiority of superiority of one ethnicity over another, except
Brazil.
Brazil. We need to get a Brazilian guest.
I mean, it is a cool country. Brazil needs to up Brazil, honestly. It needs to be the new superpower in America. USA is washed.
Absolutely. The real cultural Marxist conspiracy that is actually real is we do want everybody on planet Earth to look Brazilian. Like that is very, very real. And look me in the eyes. Even if you're a white supremacist, look me in the eyes. Wouldn't that be better? Just look at Brazilians. Would that not be better? Now I know that while I'm making this joke, making fun of white supremacists, I'm slightly being racist by generalizing a whole group of people. But that would work. That argument, my friend, would work, except for Brazilians, which is one of the most multi-ethnic nations and countries on the planet. So, huzzah, I have won an argument against myself.
Also, Wagner Moura should have won the Oscar, but yeah.
Which one?
The Secret Agent, Brazilian movie. Set during the dictatorship, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's
yeah. I had that in my Discord. We did a movie night.
Yeah, it's a good movie. In preparation for this episode, I went out and looked for how people were talking about Molyneux back in the day. And 6 years ago, the podcast QAA, whose co-host Liv has been on here, pointed out that Molyneux had been doing online content creation for 15 years. That was 6 years ago, which means he's now a 21-year veteran of this stuff. It can't be undercommunicated to what degree this guy is like a grandfather for a lot of online white supremacist creators. But another, far more important thing that QAA pointed out is that Molyneux has a large community of so-called ex-viewers or ex-listeners with support networks. In the same way, you have ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Scientologists, or ex-cult members. This is something you don't often see with online content creators. An article in The Times from 2009 tells an incredibly sad story of a teenage boy named Tom from the small English town of Leamington Spa, just southeast of Birmingham. Tom had a fraught relationship with his mother, but suddenly, according to Tom's mother, Barbara, he started seeming more cheerful. On returning from work one day, she found only a note on the doormat that read, quote, "I need to take an indefinite amount of time away from the family. Please do not contact me." I tried to look into the story in the hopes it had a happy ending. All I could find was more articles from 6 years later, where his mother was still lamenting the loss of her son to a cult leader. In a documentary by Channel 5 UK, Barbara Weed, mother of Tom, said that Stefan Molyneux had told Tom that his parents were abusing him, and that he had to, quote, defoo them. Defoo is a term invented by Stefan Molyneux. Foo, or F-O-O, all capital letters, means family of origin. Essentially, to fix all your problems, you must first abandon your family of origin for a new one. According to Linda Besner in an article called Remote Control in Real Life magazine, another young woman by the name of Colleen Cowgill, who spent a lot of her time online, used to frequent Molyneux's free domain radio forums, where she came to learn from other members that, quote, "Everything I interpreted as love was manipulation, and it was all fraud." Barbara Weed, the mother of Tom, obsessively tracked users on Molyneux's forums who had left their families, and recorded at least 100 instances of users who claimed to have cut all contact with their families. The woman, Cowgill, managed to leave the cult, but Tom is to my knowledge stuck there. Cowgill describes an atmosphere of strongly enforced conformity. Quote, "Those who choose to leave the community are sometimes targeted for doxing and harassment." In 2009, after she had cut contact with her family, the free domain radio cult had convinced her that her relationship with her boyfriend was problematic, that they were, quote, "in a codependent entanglement that failed to meet Molyneux standards."
Uh-huh.
So she broke up with her boyfriend.
I'm sorry, that's just really funny. The YouTuber doesn't think my boyfriend meets his standards.
Yeah, because, like, this guy isn't just a libertarian YouTuber. He's like a self-help guru who seems to have it all figured out. He has a total philosophy for life and total philosophy for relationships and how to engage with other people. So, to all these people, it seems like he is like a genius. That's, obviously one of the elements of what makes it a cult, but the other element is the fact that he specifically and unambiguously pushes for people to isolate themselves and to only be a part of the cult.
And he doesn't do the thing that a lot of right-wing grifters do, where they don't want to dissuade you from giving them money, following them, giving them attention, giving them power, and so on, by only talking to you about topics that they believe you will agree with them on, but then talking about other topics with another demographic or psychographic in their particular audience, basically segmenting continuously. From my experience, Molyneux literally wants to tell you what you should think about every single aspect of your life, which creates a different dynamic that is, it's still grift-oriented. There's no bigger grift than the fucking cult, because you don't just want their money, you want fucking everything. But it is, the approach is, I would argue, more radical than someone that's like, okay, I'm just going to be a guy, the Jews guy, or I'm just going to be the Mexicans guy, or I'm just going to be the white replacement guy, or I'm going to be a couple of these categories. Or I'm going to be the guy talking about women, etc., etc.
Yeah, he does it all.
Yeah, he wants to give you a hot take on absolutely everything, and to an extent in a very unapologetic way, which gives him an allure of being principled, but also, as Freda beautifully put, of genuinely being a genius, because this guy has a hot take about every single fucking thing, so you can go and ask him.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's going to go ask Candace Owens about fucking whether they should buy a house in a rural area or an urban area.
Yeah.
Right? Molyneux probably has like 1 hour rant just about why you should choose one over the other.
Yeah, he has a 1 hour rant about Star Wars. Like he does everything. One of the things that I tried to look into, because you mentioned the thing about like, taking their money and stuff. I tried to look into where, like how his funding works and everything. And the only thing I could find was from this article that I've been reading from, where they mentioned that I think it was like in 2016 or something, he had received like, at that time, like $350,000 worth of Bitcoin. And the article was like, that's not a lot of money. And, well, if he kept any of that, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, of course.
And also he had like $58,000 worth of like yearly supporters or something, I think like that. He has basically pioneered like an early version of Patreon, kind of, on his own website, where you know how like we have goofy names for our patron like tiers and everything. His top tier, guess what it's called?
What?
Philosopher King.
Oh, iconic. No, iconic. Iconic. I can't help but like, Jesus.
They've got golden blood, chat. They've got the golden blood.
Iconic.
We're mere bronze-blooded in this podcast.
And to contextualize for younger people, like we're talking like a long time ago. This was like just making $1,000 a fucking month off the internet back then was crazy.
Yeah,
shit.
This is around like 2016. This article was written where this info is, but obviously he started making this money in like the early 2000s or like mid 2000s.
Yeah. And this doesn't adjust to like ad revenue. This doesn't adjust to like back then, like a big like supporters, be it like big capital or like just the everyday Joes who fucking love your shit. They just wire you money, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so much of his finances that cannot be accounted for, nor will they ever.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Like, has he ever provided like third-party audited, accounts for how he uses his money?
Not to my knowledge, no.
That would go against his beliefs because that's the man.
Yeah, exactly.
The man.
It's fucking like, what are you, the IRS, bro? Like,
it's the extension of a parent that wants to.
I'm not being violent to you, so like, let me spend my money however the fuck I want,
I mean, I'm just struck, we've been calling it a cult, but it really does hit all of the, attributes of a, pseudo-religious movement.
Yeah.
Like, especially the isolating of members from their social networks and you know what I mean? And their friendships and their relationships and their family because they don't agree that we should abolish the government. Like it's a very unusual way to approach a political movement.
Yeah, so that's how it begins. So the woman that I mentioned, Cowgill, after she broke up with her boyfriend, she was, isolated. I think she was living with her boyfriend. So at that point, like she had nowhere to live. And it took another year before her total isolation eventually, and luckily brought her back to her parents. Linda Besner describes Molyneux Freedom Radio as a well-marketed self-help empire. And on that note, it should be noted that Molyneux' wife is a therapist who was found guilty in 2012 of professional misconduct by Ontario's College of Psychologists for recommending Molyneux' defooing, that is, abandoning your family. Yeah.
To her patients?
No, so she
or just in
she
general?
went on his podcast and used her authority as a therapist and said, this is good.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's ridiculous.
Which is professional misconduct.
And probably implies that like a lot of the at least eloquent sounding on paper psychoanalysis you love doing all the time, probably a lot of the kind of pro tips and influence came from her professional speak.
Yes, yeah. And yeah, it's fucked up. The self-help stuff for the most part wasn't what brought people into contact with Molyneux though. Among the cases I've read of people who were brought into and subsequently escaped the cult, a recurring theme is Molyneux serving as their introduction to political theory. Molyneux's Goodreads page boasts an impressive 37 authored books, the earlier of which tend to discuss what he calls anarchism. Stefan's 65-page book, Everyday Anarchy, has a chapter called Anarchy and History. In it he goes on about how the world views anarchists as terrorists with a lust for blood and says, quote, "If we value human life, as any reasonable and moral person must, then fearing anarchists rather than political leaders is like fearing spontaneous combustion rather than heart disease. In the category of causing deaths, a single government leader outranks all anarchists tens of thousands of times." He then goes on to say, quote, "Does this seem like a surprising perspective to you? Ah, well, that is what happens when you look at the facts of the world rather than the stories of the victors." This is such like a fucking Call of Duty brained like understanding of history, but also like such a common thing. You've been lied to. He's bringing the facts. You've probably heard that one before. Of course, Molyneux had a very different idea of anarchism than what I think those of us coming from a European perspective might have. In an incredibly funny coincidence, I own a similar little booklet I picked up at a left-wing bookstore in London called Bookmarks by an author named John Molyneux. The book is called Anarchism, a Marxist Criticism. Unlike Stefan Molyneux's portrayal of anarchism as a movement of people hounded by and oppressed by governments, forced into the shadows and branded as terrorists, John Molyneux describes it as a movement of hopeful radicals. Quote, "Anarchism has always had a strong appeal for those who rebel against this rotten society. It says we do not have to live like this. There does not have to be rich and poor, exploiters and exploited, rulers and ruled. There does not have to be war, racism, oppression, and there doesn't have to be domination of the majority by the minority, or even the minority by the majority. Against the ceaseless indoctrination which holds that the mass of people are by nature either stupid or self-seeking and therefore have to be told what to do and kept in line by higher authority, anarchism asserts that we have the potential to live cooperatively and harmoniously." End quote. John Molyneux's approach to understanding anarchism is empathetic and sees the genuine desire of, most often young, radicals for a better world. Stefan Molyneux's booklet sums up the foundational element of his theory thusly, quote, "Well, there clearly are two kinds of leaders in this world, those who lead by incentive and those who lead by force. Those who lead by incentive will offer you a salary to come and work for them. Those who lead by force will throw you in jail if you do not pick up a gun and fight for them." It's a very dramatic contrast that he's constructed. Another quick quote, "Those who lead by force will simply tell you that if you do not pay the property taxes to fund their schools, you will be thrown in jail." The difference between these two visions of anarchism is that the radicals that John Molyneux speaks highly of in his criticism of them, and the movement that Stefan Molyneux is trying to sell you on through visions of horror and suffering, is that the left-wing anarchists are truly envisioning a different world. Stefan Molyneux is debating in favor of the primacy of one element of our existing society over other elements of our society. He argues that we already live in anarchy, the only thing left to do is to get rid of the government. Quote, "For instance, like dating, marriage, and family, in any reasonably free society, these activities do not fall in the realm of political coercion. No government agency chooses who you have to marry and have children with, and punishes you with jail for disobeying the rulings. Voluntarism, incentive, mutual advantage, dare we say advertising, all run the free market of love, sex, and marriage."
How the fuck does he use advertising as one of the counter positions to being manipulated into something? Literally an entire, advertising is propaganda adjusted for the sale of commodities, usually in the private market. That's why, when you see a government trying to pitch you a particular way of life, you're like, herder, this is propaganda. But especially during the 50s and 60s, for those of you who are new to the show, I'm literally a marketing guy, so I'm not pulling this out of my ass. During 50s, 60s, there was a particular switch in which advertising did not only try to sell your product based on the qualities that it represents and the benefits that it can give to your life, but what they started doing is bundling the idea that if you purchase something, you will reach certain higher stages of self-actualization, aka of reaching happiness, reaching fulfillment, etc., etc., etc. And because the private enterprises were doing it and not the government, all of a sudden it was good and based and chill and normal propaganda, the way apparently Molyneux himself also sees
Exactly,
it.
yeah.
But at the end of the day, it is doing exactly the same thing. One could argue much more efficiently than any state propaganda ever could, because it is not viewed as propaganda. Therefore, it is not immediately viewed with a large dose of skepticism, which then, because of that very fact, allows for the concepts and ideas that are being pitched in an advertising campaign. Keep in mind, these are just ads, these are campaigns. Most of them you don't even notice. This is why they probably work a lot better on you than herder, join the army and shit. So TLDR, it's fucking crazy that this guy's like, people trying to manipulate you sucks, but what private enterprise are trying to manipulate you, it's actually super based.
It's awesome, yeah. And also the fact that he wants to make dating and everything, analogous to private enterprise is also very telling. Yeah, because all run the free market of love, sex, and marriage is what he's saying. Like the free market. It's the sexual marketplace. It's the fucking Looksmaxer terminology before the Looksmaxers existed.
Yeah. Iconic.
Yeah, but also what's also very funny is what you said about marketing where, if this was done by governments, it would be very blatant and obvious. Molyneux uses that kind of logic to argue for his version of anarchism where he says We think of anarchism as in like his right wing, I guess like more like anarcho-capitalism, as a dirty thing, a scary thing. But that's only, when we talk about it in those terms. In reality, it's awesome in our personal life. It's just bad in, I guess, when the government is doing it or something like that. Like he's doing the same thing, but arguing for, I guess, I don't know, fucking owning children as slaves or something.
Oh, no, he definitely supports the free market of children. There's no doubt about that.
I don't have any citation for that, but I'm just making an educated guess.
Well, I mean, it's, we'll talk more about libertarian philosophy in a bit, but there's always been a long-term approach toward things like, for example, adopting children, where they carry their, commoditization logic to the extreme and basically believe that parents should be able to sell their children.
Yeah. And he's talking about how, like, the dating market is very voluntary and very, it's just incentive and mutual advantage or whatever. Dating is highly commercialized. Products are pushed by corporations that purport to provide advantages in dating. In some instances, with people relying heavily on dating apps, corporations exert total control over your dating life, limiting how many people you can contact and offering potential advantages if you have the money to pay for them. That doesn't sound like super free and open, but that's perfectly fine to Stefan because it's the logic of competition and the market. Extrapolate this to other elements of society and you will have those who manage to live safe and comfortable lives, while you inevitably will have those who do not due to circumstances of their own making or outside of their control. To Stefan, this is fine, because there's no government coercion involved. No threat of violence if you don't comply. When stripped down to the bones, and trust me, it doesn't take very long, there's not much to it, then Stefan's ideology is fundamentally, I shouldn't be told what to do.
So first and foremost, the moment somebody uses the word robber barons, first of all, they weren't robbers, they weren't thieves, they were producing capitalists who were satisfying the market demand in a voluntary fashion. Like, those rich people accumulated so much money by making other people happier. Those bastards. So they weren't robbers and they weren't barons.
Beyond this simple fact, he leaves the question of what's so good about this philosophy and this new world sort of up in the air. When asking himself the question of the nature of democracy and welfare, he says that if democracy isn't predicated on a lie, and people want to provide welfare, then why do you need a government to force them to pay into welfare? He then flips it around on himself and says, but if democracy is a lie, and this isn't the will of the majority, then you would need to force people to provide welfare. He kind of constructs a paradox here in his own argumentation, and then he just drops the subject by going, quote, the first virtue is always honesty, and we should be honest enough to admit when we do not have reasonable answers to these reasonable objections. This does not mean that we must immediately come up with new answers, but rather just ponder them, and only when we are satisfied that the objections are valid should we begin looking for rational and empirical answers. Which is like, okay, so your answer is just, I don't know, lol, but I think this objection is wrong, I just haven't figured it out why yet.
You'll find this a lot, and anytime you cover conservative influencers is this exact type of argumentation, which is the fallacy of incredulity. They can't come up with an answer intuitively or off the top of their head, so they imagine nobody can, which to a reasonable person is just an indication that maybe you need to like read more, see more perspectives, learn more about the nature of reality. But to them, it's just confirmation that nobody could figure this out, because apparently they're the smartest person in the world and they see all angles, and just intuitively I look at that and say, it's like saying, I don't enjoy paying my rent every month, but I am inherently being coerced to do so because if I don't, I'll get my ass ripped out of my house. The solution to the rent problem isn't just not paying rent. It is developing a society that's providing housing as a human right, and that requires building infrastructure to replace the process of paying rent. For him, it's just, I don't want to pay taxes, so taxes must not be democratic.
Yeah, it's very funny how, like, if you try to trace a logic, ideally, we are meant to end up in the same sort of location when it comes to, the actual solutions to the problems that he's identifying. Like, the government makes me pay money for this thing. Why is that so? Or I have to pay for these things or whatever. But that's because, like, we are fundamentally, I guess, like, just completely wired in a different way when we think about this, because his problems start and end at someone is telling me what to do.
It's criticizing authority just for authority's sake, and not looking at it from the prism of who carries authority.
There's no systemic element to it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it is a completely false dichotomy to believe that the fluidity of authority does not allow a relationship between two human beings in which some form of authority is not exercised by one over another. People who analyze things from a systemic perspective, people, as you said, people who actually quote unquote want to improve the world, view authority from the prism of how can we make sure that the way it is utilized amongst fellow citizens, fellow humans, etc., does the least amount of damage, is the least hypocritical, is the most efficient, etc. It is inherently adolescent, it is inherently childish, it is inherently lacking of complex understanding of how, with all due respect to Mr. Molyneux, how the world works, to just say fuck authority for authority's sake.
Yeah.
It feels good, it's great, and sure, fuck authority, but there is not a legitimate, sustainable way of governing politics. Hell, why am I even using the word sustainable? That is not politics,
Yeah.
because it misses a both philosophical but also material category, which is as undeniable in human relations as fucking gravity is on the planet, right? It is a tool, and the way it is utilized against or for you will define it from your particular perspective as either good or bad, right? For him, it as a whole being bad is like saying that some of the main reasons why we can't have enough food for everyone is, let's use gravity again, is because gravity leads to plants not growing as many fruits, so fuck gravity.
Yeah.
Like it's what? Let's abolish gravity, but you cannot abolish gravity.
Let's abolish gravity.
Because
Yeah.
let's abolish gravity. It's as sensical as that.
I would say that it's really just a rejection of the idea of a system in and of itself,
Yes.
right? Like he's saying, I don't consent to the system, therefore the system ought not to exist, right? Or the system is some sort of philosophic wrong.
Yeah.
And if you were to counter with some sort of like consequentialist critique where you said like, hey, we charge taxes in order to pay for a water system, which means that when you take a shit, it doesn't just flow into the local river, right? It gets collected and controlled by experts and engineers who process it and render it safe. And then we do that for the entire city. That's a value that results in you not catching cholera.
Yeah.
Or you not catching diphtheria, or you not catching typhoid, right? And that saves and enhances your life. And in order to avoid the free rider problem, where some people would, enjoy the benefits of the sewage control system, but not want to pay for it, we impose taxes. And then we create a socio-political reality where everyone understands that you have to pay your taxes and you get these social benefits, and that results in human society improving and advancing. He rejects that and says, if not having typhus is so good, people would voluntarily pay taxes, so we shouldn't have to pay our taxes. And it's baby shit. It's stupid baby shit.
Yeah, basically. Or he actually explicitly argues in the book that people would voluntarily come together and not pay taxes. He doesn't say that because that's a bad word. We don't like that. He instead says that people would come together and create charities, private charities or private organizations like that. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would be better. But he never really argues why or how they would be better. He just says they will be.
Different word, Freda. It makes me feel better. Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Different word.
Well, and the problem is whenever you try to take these libertarian or, anarcho-capitalist
right-wing anarchist, whatever you wanna call
blathering
them.
seriously, they have the problem known as history.
Yep.
Where we did live without sewage systems that were provided collectively, right?
But did you have Sewage Corp 4000 that with
Yeah, right,
$399.99 a year will clean up your shit?
Yeah, and we had the ability to buy and sell children if we wanted to. It's called the fucking Bronze Age.
Well, and not only that, but you can look at areas of the world where they don't have those institutions, right? For a variety of reasons that we're not going to get into. But basically, there are places where human beings live today and they lack these institutions of government or of state power, right? And what happens? Does Sewage Corp come in and build a beautiful sewage system and charge a fee and everybody volunteer? No, it fucking just doesn't exist and the people suffer and die.
Or they struggle together in smaller groups in order to create something that can sort of alleviate their suffering, but it's never to the same degree as the collective mobilization of a fuck ton of humans. because obviously
Mhm.
it can't be.
Absolutely.
So the book is an incredibly weird and meandering book that reads like a half-assed manifesto on why bedtime and homework is oppressive or abusive. And I think this is key to what makes Stefan Molyneux so successful. He at once sells an anarchist political theory very much divorced from the radicals in history, like the anarchists who were executed in Chicago in 1887 for throwing a homemade bomb at the police who were trying to crack down on a protest for an 8-hour workday. He obviously doesn't want an 8-hour workday. He wants you to engage in a voluntary contract with your employer for however many hours you have to work.
Voluntary.
Yeah, of course. Not coercive at all.
Well, I mean, can we just do a quick aside about the coercive nature of being a living organism, where if you don't have certain, nutrition, water, shelter, the necessities of life, you'll die. So if you set up a system where the worker is compelled by nature to work for someone else or else they die, that is a coercion greater than the billy club or the tax collector or whatever the hell else he's complaining about. We all need this stuff to survive, but if you put it in the hands of a single individual or corporation or whatever, they in fact are using violence against me because I don't have access to the necessities of life.
But that's a systemic form of violence, which he doesn't like thinking about, I guess. The European, the left-wing anarchism, also the American anarchism of the 1800s, was based on a systemic critique, a holistic understanding of all the things that cause suffering in society. The point was to combat all forms of oppression. This isn't the sort of anarchism that Stefan is selling. He's selling an anarchism based on personal virtue and a way of debating yourself or reasoning yourself to answers about society. One immense problem with arguing yourself towards answers regarding something as complex as society as a whole is that it relies mostly, or entirely, on your intuitive understanding of the world. In an Inside article at the Global Network on Extremism and Technology, talking about a study they did on Molyneux and his community, Daniel Jurg et al. Discuss what they call a, quote, super participant, or someone who is a highly involved commenter. After a year of commenting on Molyneux's videos, this super participant left the following comment, quote, "Certainty has been something I've craved since I was 10 and started reading Descartes' Meditations. Molyneux's theory and other recent works finally got me there, and it is as if someone has taken their boot off my chest, and I can breathe for the first time. All my intuitive understanding of the evils of violence finally felt grounded on the foundation of a reason." This so-called obsession with reason, or the sort of debate pervert culture, is something you see everywhere on the right nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is framed as the objective truth, and opposing views are framed as emotive, biased, or deluded. Quoting the researchers again, "We discovered an almost obsessive relationship with logic, reasoning, and truth as core values among Molyneux's most engaged audiences, who frame extreme ideas as the, quote, sad truth."
I mean, and there you could just see like the roots of like the black pill or the red pill, right? Like these are just things that you have to swallow.
Yep.
You may not like the taste, but it's good for you. It's the medicine of an unfortunate truth. And what it is usually apologia for some sort of crime.
Yep.
This, alongside the fact that anarchism appeals to the young, is a powerful combo for indoctrinating young and impressionable people. These are meant to be hopeful people with radical politics, but Stefan blunted it into a defense of every aspect of the system except for the one that the marginalized can sometimes use to their advantage. This fundamental core of his ideology then metastasized in a very predictable way.
When you study the far right in America and in the world today, especially online, you can't help but notice that libertarianism is one of the wide ends of the funnel for the radicalization pipeline of the alt-right. Many of the most prominent fascists, Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McInnes, who was the founder of the fascist gang, the Proud Boys, Richard Spencer, and hell, even Charlie Kirk,
Rest in peace.
all previously identified as libertarian at some point. Stefan Molyneux is no exception. Stefan began as one of the most prominent figures in the online libertarian and anarcho-capitalist right. And as we've discussed, through his platform Free Domain, he built a large audience around anti-state politics, extreme laissez-faire free market economics, vicious Reddit atheism, and a broad-based critique of any government authority. This early content relied heavily on the works of right-wing libertarian thinkers, heavy on the air quotes, associated with the Mises Institute or writers such as Lew Rockwell. And just a mic note here, this is some of the most pseudo-intellectual swill you'll ever have. If you ever read this crap, you're going to really find that it is vacuous and garbage.
I want to comment something on that.
Go ahead. Please insult libertarianism for me, please.
Yes, there's something so fucking stupid. Because I made a video on like this one libertarian guy who's talking about history a long time ago now, who now stopped doing videos. His last video was that he was going to an Ayn Rand conference, which is fucking hilarious, and then he just dropped off the face of the earth. But I'm assuming he probably got pulled into some sort of cult, which is sad.
Hopefully they sold his kidneys on the free market.
But one of the really sad things or silly things with these like Mises Institute guys, like these right-wing libertarian thinkers, a lot of their like stuff comes from a guy called Murray Rothbard, and I'll talk a little bit about him later. But Murray Rothbard, I think it was Murray Rothbard or is Ludwig von Mises, one of the two, had this theory they called praxeology. And it basically is a theory of everything, just like how Molyneux purports to be able to explain everything. And their theory of everything here is basically that human beings act according to incentives. And through this, you can reason yourself to an understanding of any phenomena in history or just in life. And this is a very fundamentally like insane idea, because if you try to understand any...
It takes 5 seconds to think of something that disproves that. Like a mother giving her resources to her child.
Yeah, well, I mean, they can argue that that's an incentive, but like she has an incentive to do that. But I'm going to say the part that I find so insane and that I just do not understand how anyone takes it seriously is that if they extend this to history, which they do, then you kind of like have a situation where you're just trying to understand history based on whatever the fuck you already know and that's in your head. Right? You're trying to understand like the world based on just purely what's already in your head. Because if you're only reasoning yourself to something, if it's all a priori, right, before you've even like collected any sort of empirical evidence, whatever, nothing you're kind of identifying, nothing you're kind of like reasoning yourself to, arguing for,
Connecting the dots.
Exactly, nothing is connected to the real world necessarily. It's all fantasy, and that's like it's all fucking gobbledygook.
Beautifully put, for real. That's why it's so often the beginner ideology, right?
Yeah.
And Mike is gonna go more in depth about that, of course. But that's why it's the BBL of almost any funnel. Hell, it doesn't even have to be of a funnel. Like I remember when I was being exposed to Stephen Molyneux, when I was being exposed to, hey, you can have alternative perspectives on why the world around you kind of sucks at kind of the age when you're realizing, oh my God, there's crazy shit out there. You know, it's not all a rainbow and butterflies because you just wake up and food is on the table and your goon sock is cleaned every morning, right? Like people actually have to work and do stuff.
Yeah,
and
example.
one day you will. Yeah, or that, you have to do things.
Yeah.
When you realize you have to do things, and you're like, holy shit, Dad, I don't want to do things, and then you start, figuring out if there's a way to fix this world so that you don't have to do things. And libertarianism is right there waiting for you because it doesn't need you to contextualize anything. That's why the way you, now pun intended, contextualize, Freda, is very good. Because you can get into libertarianism literally as a lobotomized animal. Like anybody can get it. It's like, big guy, bad, freedom, good. Fucking, fuck the man. It's like, oh my God, fuck yeah,
it is completely empty.
Don't feel bad about the homeless guy because he fucking deserved it. The ego. And it's... Everybody can get into it. That's why it's the entry. That's why it's the entry. Hence the BBL. I'm going to milk that. Just like BBL does. Okay,
keep bringing up the BBL.
You're going to have to explain this again.
Speaking of someone with a BBL, Mike, please.
I have long back syndrome where my back just extends straight down. I'm a sufferer.
Hank Hill ass?
No ass. Yeah, that's a Hank Hill ass. Yeah. No, actually, I have been improving it. As an aside, Mike ass update. It's growing now. So
growing
don't
now.
worry.
Good.
What was I saying?
Subscribe to get Mike a BBL. Subscribe on Patreon to get Mike a BBL. Let's get Mike a big badonkadonk. Everybody that's over $6 gets me into Alcoholic Anonymous. Everybody who donates more than $6 gets me into Alcoholic Anonymous, gets Mike a BBL, and hires a guy that forces Freda to game maximum 2 hours a day.
Oh no, that's not it. You're barely getting started.
Yep.
You're just loading the spreadsheet updates. Okay, where was I started? Yeah, okay. So, Stefan Molyneux, early mid-2000s. He described himself as a rational philosopher offering a secular ethics and a guide to personal liberation through voluntarism, a form of anarcho-capitalism that rejects all state authority entirely. And, you could hear in my voice that I have a lot of contempt for this philosophy, but let me just give you a little sample of the type of stuff you'll read from the Mises Institute and libertarian thinkers like Murray Rothbard. Here's an example from his article, Children and Rights, quoting him. Now, if a parent may own his child within the framework of non-aggression and runaway freedom, then he may also transfer that ownership to someone else. He may give the child out for adoption, or he may sell the rights to the child in a voluntary contract. In short, we must face the fact that the purely free society will have a flourishing free market in children. End quote. And this is actually one of the least offensive parts of this article. It also explains how parents have the right to withhold food and treatment from children until their deaths. That there is no positive obligation on the part of parents to care for their children. And because of that, anytime they decide to give up their resources to benefit the child, that therefore grants them a kind of ownership over that child as an extension of their own property. Now, they're not permitted to abuse the child, but they can sell the child to a willing buyer. And if you're listening to this, you can't help but be disgusted, right? I'm sure a million scenarios of how a parent might be coerced to sell their child out of desperation and who they might sell that child to, right? But to Murray Rothbard, that's just the market working as intended. If you have an asset, your child, and you need money to live, then it's only right and proper that the free market determine a market clearing price and you sell it to a willing buyer, right? And that is the essence of what they conceive freedom to be. The right to purchase other human beings, fundamentally, is what they consider to be a freedom from oppression. And I don't know how you can look at that and not imagine the perspective of the sold child. But to them, that perspective is no perspective at all. So for me, over time, Stefan's content, it shifted away from that kind of abstract libertarian philosophy and was incentivized by the algorithm and the internet to shift towards the old standbys. Culture war politics, immigration fears, race and IQ discussions, and high-pitched squealing about demographic panic. By the mid-2010s, Stefan was widely described as firmly within the alt-right online media ecosystem. His work promoted scientific racism, white nationalist ideas, and far-right ideology.
This shift was prompted by outside forces, but very much predicated on Stefan's ideology and style. The first significant peak in Stefan's engagement on YouTube occurred when he came to the defense of George Zimmerman, who shot and killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in 2012. A Florida jury acquitted Zimmerman for second-degree murder. Zimmerman later auctioned off the gun he used to kill Martin with.
Can I just butt in to give a little bit of context? Yep. I'm sure most people listening to this podcast know who George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin are. But Trayvon Martin was an unarmed black child in his own neighborhood who was walking home with Skittles and Arizona iced tea, who was gunned down in cold blood by George Zimmerman, who was stalking the neighborhood and racially profiled him, called the police. They told him to desist, nonetheless confronted Trayvon, and then a scuffle ensued where George pulled out a concealed weapon and murdered the kid. And that is the context of this situation, where you would think a radical libertarian would see somebody who was walking in their own community being attacked and murdered in cold blood and see that as a, invasion of their rights, their freedom. But instead, somehow, the white male libertarians found themselves defending the aggressor.
One of the things that Stefan Molyneux mentions in his video very early on, one of the first points he makes, is that the media is lying to you, because the media is referring to Zimmerman, who is Hispanic, as a white Hispanic man. And then Stefan Molyneux says this weird thing where he's like, just like they might say Obama is a white black man.
So, just in case you've been on Marseille, let's talk about George Zimmerman. He is a Hispanic American, oddly enough, referred to in the media as a white Hispanic, the way that they refer to Barack Obama as a white black.
Which is fucking weird. Yeah.
Can I just say, again, just to explain, racial politics to people who are uninitiated to America, you may not understand. Hispanic is not a race. It refers to lineages connected to Latin America, but a large percentage of Latin Americans trace their lineage back to Europe and are in fact white. They are perceived as white. They identify as white. In fact, for much of American history, the majority of Hispanic population self-identified as white. So it's perfectly logical, in fact, extremely common for somebody in Florida to identify as a white Hispanic man.
Yeah.
That is not a contradiction whatsoever. So Stefan is either stupid and doesn't know this basic demographic fact, or he's lying and misleading his audience of white racists.
I think it's the latter. Because one of the things that may have helped prompt the virality of Stefan's video was that it was shared and promoted by David Duke, the Grand Wizard of the KKK. In the aforementioned study by Daniel Jurg et al., by analyzing 2 million comments left by Molyneux's audience, they found that before 2014, the most popular terms included words like government, money, market, power. Then in 2014, after Molyneux began talking about the murder of Trayvon Martin, it shifted to terms like woman, black, Trump, and white. Molyneux was pivoting to an outright white supremacy that had always been ruminating in the background of his commentary. Quote, Molyneux increasingly evoked this framing of a highly emotive media vis-a-vis him as an objective and rational philosopher, mediating between the ugly truth of objectivism and the wishful thinking of social constructivists. This discourse is highly important in his later discussions on scientific racism. End quote.
Looking at human beings as one species is not biologically valid. We are a variety of subspecies, politically, ethnically sometimes, definitely in terms of gender, in terms of IQ, in terms of culture. These produce physical brain differences that are very hard to remediate when you get older. And so we are a cluster of genetics all fighting to reproduce their own particular genetics. And all of this requires that the IQ can be raised. The IQ of a lot of these countries is 85. That is a full standard deviation below the IQ of Europe.
What accounts for someone who seemingly was an extremist for individual personal freedom shifting smoothly into an extreme authoritarian fascist who disregarded the rights of those he deemed inferior? Nick Gillespie, a longtime writer for the Koch network-funded Reason, admitted in a blog post that libertarians were ripe for radicalization into the far right for a number of ideological affinities. Libertarians believe that private actors have a right of association so strong that it should be government policy to allow businesses to refuse customers for racist, homophobic, or sexist reasons. Furthermore, much of the far right had postured themselves as anti-interventionists in foreign policy, even though Donald Trump has pretty firmly put that idea to bed with his nonstop interventions, which lines up with the purported beliefs of libertarians. Matt Lewis, writing about libertarians in 2017 in the Daily Beast, said, "Libertarianism is somewhat unique in its unflinching support of free speech. In some cases, this free speech is unsavory. If you're anti-political correctness, libertarianism might seem like a good place to land, even if you don't buy into the whole libertarian philosophy. And I would just say that if you are a racist and you're trying to conceal those positions behind some sort of pseudo-intellectual veneer of free speech absolutism, you could just say, hey, I may not like the Nazi racist speech, but I just believe in free speech, so we have to let them do it, guys. We have to let them come to the campuses and tell black students they're inferior, because if you don't, that means you don't support free speech. Even if there is no scientific, or historical or other account for those beliefs, we just have to let people say it, because otherwise you'd be impugning my precious free speech. And one of the things that I think is almost belabored at this point is you can look out and see how, the pro-Palestinian movement has been actively suppressed and punished for their positions on the Gaza genocide or other foreign policy interventions.
I didn't notice. Really?
And yet all these free speech absolutists, I don't see them out there defending the right of the Palestinian or the green card holder or the naturalized citizen, their views on Israel or Gaza. They're happy now to see the state used to suppress what they perceive to be left-wing speech.
Are you familiar with Rebel News?
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just had to look up when you were talking about that. I had to look up how Stefan Molyneux was talking about Charlottesville in 2017, because it hadn't occurred to me. And it turns out he had like an interview with one of the reporters called Faith Goldie, where they both co-covered the Charlottesville Nazi rally. And Rebel News is far right. Faith Goldie was fired for her coverage of Charlottesville because she also conducted an interview with the Daily Stormer, which is like
a Nazi publication.
We talked about them before. Yeah.
So clearly there's an ideological relationship between libertarians and those on the far right. If you believe someone has the right to hate speech and the right to exclude someone from a public accommodation or a lunch counter on the basis of their race, you've convinced yourself that defending those policies is morally righteous. It's a short step to defending those policies as outright necessary. And that's basically what's happened, right? A major part of Stefan's transition involved reframing these libertarian concerns about freedom and property rights into arguments about race, national identity, and immigration. As Molyneux has moved further and further to the fascist right, he increasingly claimed that social stability and free markets depended on ethnic homogeneity and genetic intelligence differences between populations. This rhetoric appealed to sections of the online libertarian world that were already skeptical of multiculturalism, feminism, immigration policy, etc. And I think this is kind of a point that I'm going to continue to harp with him, which is, I'm a libertarian that believes in free speech, but that is and this is the transitionary argument, right? Which is, I believe in this free speech, but that's an idea of white Western men, right? So if you value free speech and our society, you have to defend it against interlopers from these collectivist others who they'll come in and then outvote us, and they will abolish our individualists' Western inheritance. And so I may believe in the equality of all people, but you don't. So therefore, I'm going to take away your rights.
Yeah.
And so they've kind of debate lorded themselves into supporting authoritarianism in defense of a libertarianism that they no longer defend as an actual living policy.
It gives a sort of allure of borderline like knighthood. Like, I did not want to fight you, but you simply do not understand the way of civilized men, and therefore I will begrudgingly do
us
so.
honorable Westerners.
Right? It's like white knighting for free speech.
Stefan Molyneux unsheathing his katana.
And well, you just have this situation where it's common in alt-right or right-wing spaces now to be like, that's why the West, we've got liberated women and queers.
Yeah.
And then you ask them what their positions are on as policy of liberated women and queers, and it's like, shove them back in the closet, fire them from the schools, and don't let women get a job.
Fire them from a cannon.
That's why Western supremacy is based on beliefs and systems that they are trying to unwind. And this is almost stereotype at this point for how common this exact kind of line of thought is with the alt-right and the far right and this libertarian right. Now, we should also talk about a concept which we've looked at before, which is audience capture. Molyneux, Stefan Molyneux, he benefited from the broader YouTube algorithmic ecosystem of that early 2010s, right? He frequently collaborated with or appeared alongside figures connected to the anti-SJW internet sphere, which we have talked on time and time again. And it's kind of the through line. It's this counter-hegemonic organization around creating a scapegoat that could apply to young men of almost any background. His interviews and discussions with right-wing media personalities to help expose his libertarian audience to so-called race realism and far-right talking points while presenting them in a pseudo-intellectual debate lord style. And if you know anything about, a upper middle class, white, underachieving man, there's nothing that he loves more than some sort of pseudo-intellectual online debate. It's important to note here that the conception of the world that the libertarian holds is a just world fallacy. They believe that wealth concentrates in the hands of the deserving, capitalists who from the sweat of their brow promote humanity with value, and thus rewarded in the free market with wealth. In effect, if you're poor, it's because you deserve to be poor. This explains why the demographics of libertarians are overwhelmingly white and male. It's easy to ignore the barriers and exploitations of history if people who profited look like or were directly related to you. The direct linkage between the far right and the libertarian right in America is embodied by the work of Hans Hermann Hoppe. In a speech to the Mises Circle in 2015, Hoppe declared, quote, "Immigrants have access to public roads, public transportation, public buildings, and so on. Combine this with the state's other curtailments of private property rights, and the result is artificial demographic shifts that would not occur in a free market. Property owners are forced to associate and do business with individuals they might otherwise avoid." He concluded by saying, "The very cultures that the incoming migrants are said to enrich us with could not have developed had they been constantly bombarded with waves of immigration by peoples of radically different cultures. So the multicultural argument doesn't even make sense. It is impossible to believe that the US or Europe will be a freer place after several more decades of uninterrupted mass migration. Given the immigration patterns that the US and EU governments encourage, the long-term result will be to make the constituencies for continued government growth so large as to be practically unstoppable. Open borders libertarians active at that time will scratch their heads and claim not to understand why their promotion of free markets is having so little success. Everyone else will know the answer." End quote.
If one wants to go further back in the history of the Mises Institute and the academics that influenced Hans Hermann Hoppe, there's, of course, Ludwig von Mises, but there's also Murray Rothbard, who we talked a little bit about. I want to stress another aspect of Murray Rothbard. He was a dear friend of Ayn Rand, the intellectual who set Molyneux on his sort of intellectual journey, quote-unquote intellectual, I guess. But he was also an associate of a man we've also already mentioned, the Grand Wizard of the KKK, David Duke. Murray Rothbard argued that IQ could be used in the, quote, fight against egalitarianism. He viewed any attempt at interfering in the so-called natural order as inherently evil. Things he brought up that were inherently evil in this regard were things like the Civil Rights Act, for example.
So that is the linkage between libertarian and free markets. They're ideas that flow from the minds of Western men, Western white men.
Western men, trademark.
And foreign cultures and identities corrupt the political world by introducing foreign collectivist political worldviews. These others are incompatible with the libertarian worldview, and therefore the rights of the immigrant is justly invaded because of the threat they pose to libertarian political fortunes. With the rise of Donald Trump, Molyneux openly began supporting nationalist and right populist politicians, including Trump, Marine Le Pen, and Geert Wilders. His rhetoric increasingly centered on declining Western civilization, anti-immigration politics, and conspiratorial narratives about demographic change. This is where the Great Replacement idea gained significant purchase in even mainstream conservative thought. The idea that free market capitalism was the intellectual heart of the white Western world, and that by allowing immigration, that culture would be corrupted, leftists if the person describing the theory was a mainstream conservative, Jews if they were alt-right, were inviting the ravening hordes of third worlders to vote for leftist collective politics that would loot the earned wealth of white men. Before we go on, I wanted to take a step back and talk about the incredibly influential online campaign of Ron Paul in 2012. Now, in 2012, we had a situation where Barack Obama was very clearly not going to deliver the wide sweeping change that most people had imagined, and was campaigning as a competent centrist technocrat who could be trusted to keep maintenance of the relatively small concessions he had managed to get in the first part of his first term. And there was a real desire for more radical politics within America. And in 2012, it found its most successful purchase in the campaign of a kooky, elderly Texas congressman by the name of Ron Paul, famous for being severely anti-Social Security, in favor of radically curtailing Americans' foreign policy and foreign aid, and somebody who supported the libertarian perspective of drug legalization. He was seen as this radical departure from the status quo politics, and he became extremely popular on places like Reddit, YouTube, and other spaces where young white men would congregate who were desperate for kind of a radical departure from the status quo that was ultimately offered by the Republicans and the Democrats and Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, the most two moderate, stay the course possible politicians that either party could have nominated. And the thing about Ron Paul is he's exactly the type of libertarian that we've been describing, right? He believes in a lot of these pseudo-intellectual race science beliefs. In fact, he had published a newsletter where he had called Martin Luther King Jr. a pedophile and a lying socialist satyr.
One of the things I think is funny about that is that every right-winger, when they talk about Martin Luther King, they tend to make him very apolitical. And Ron Paul, I guess, like, is a little honest in that he says Martin Luther King is left-wing, but I guess had to, like, sprinkle in the fucking satyr, which I don't know what the fuck called. I've never heard anyone call someone a satyr before.
And, you know, his newsletters were full of racially insensitive or outright racist statements. For example, in one of his newsletters, he suggested that black activists who wanted to rename New York City should rename it in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. and call it Welfaria, Zooville, Rape Town, Dirtburg, or Lazyopolis. And he had another article called The Pink House, where he said he missed the closet and that homosexuals should not speak for the rest of society. And we were all far better off when social pressure kept them, you know, hiding their activities. You know, so basically, Ron Paul represented that hopeful parts of libertarianism in the sense of like, hey, we should pull back our troops from overseas and stop doing so many wars. But when you peel back that layer, you're immediately hit by the core of American libertarian movement, which is barely concealed race hatred. And so when somebody like Donald Trump arises, he creates, you know, an opportunity for that pipeline from libertarianism to fully connect to the far right.
By the way, Molyneux was like a big Ron Paul guy in 2012. He made videos criticizing him before that, but when he was running like for the GOP, I think was it for the GOP?
GOP nomination, yes.
He basically like was begging people to go and vote for him.
What an entryist coward.
Yep.
And unluckily for him, for Stefan, you know, his pivot to the far right came a bit too early in the woke corporate era of the late 2010s and 2020. By 2020, most major technology platforms removed or suspended his accounts for violating hate speech policies. YouTube permanently banned his channel alongside a number of other white nationalist creators. Other services like PayPal cut their ties with him. He was debanked.
Yeah. One of the, or actually two of the people who were also hit with this at the same time was the aforementioned Grand Wizard of the KKK, David Duke, and Richard Spencer.
So, Stefan Molyneux embodies in his own personal brand the political transition of the right-wing internet from Ron Paul revolutionaries to racist, transphobic, anti-immigrant, anti-feminist fascists of the modern right. His trajectory reflects a broader pattern where anti-government rhetoric, hostility toward egalitarian policies and politics, and the internet anti-feminist, anti-SJW culture has become firmly intertwined with white identity politics and authoritarian nationalism. And I think that's the best way to understand Stefan, is started out with this anti-authority perspective, and then through rotting his brain through race hatred, you got him to support the most authoritarian possible government. Another white man falling for the racial bribe.
Yep.
Hate to see it.
All right, so my two eloquent friends here have walked you through how Molyneux built his operation, the cult dynamics, the way he packaged white nationalist pseudoscience into a veneer of philosophy and just asking questions, and then the broader pipeline that modded people from libertarian shit into the far-right explosive radioactive diarrhea type shit. What I want to do on my end now is zoom out a little and talk about how it ended, or at least how it was supposed to end, because the story of the era leading to Molyneux's deplatforming, the so-called adpocalypse of the late 2010s, tells us something even more important than whatever Stephen's whole life was doomed to represent. It taught us about how the internet works, not how it's supposed to work, how it actually works. So, the Adpocalypse, one of the most instructive episodes in the history of online media, left genuinely underappreciated outside of content creator circles. In order to understand it, we gotta go back to 2017. The world's largest YouTuber of the time, PewDiePie, decided it would be funny to pay a bunch of dudes on the internet to do something on camera, record themselves and send it back for payment. Back then, pay for Cameo was a very, very, very new thing. So like any normal, very stable, rational person, he decided to make the dudes in the video write death to all Jews on a board as they dance in traditional African garments in what appears to be a forest. Yes, he paid a bunch of black dudes to hold up a death to all Jews sign and then posted it without blinking even twice on YouTube. Oh, what a different era. That, ladies and gentlemen and NBs, was the last time internet culture and media was left as a separate space, let's call it that, to mainstream reporting. The Wall Street Journal caught the little quote-unquote joke and published an article. What came later was, at the time, fucking unbelievable. A platform that was giving ad placement to absolutely everyone in the YouTube Partner Program now realized it was playing ads on, well, Nazi shit. Advertisers were, of course, not very pleased, and not only the ones that ran their product placement through YouTube, but also the ones that gave sponsorships to any and every person with a platform that they could find online. All of a sudden, the free money printing machine stopped for everyone. Not just online fascists, but everyone. They were all going to get screened now. And yes, that included quote-unquote political voices that were doing the anti-fascist rhetoric as well. I personally have a video back when I was doing videos tackling misogyny and the co-opting of masculinity by reactionary forces, getting 18 plus for misogyny. So take that however you want and the consequences of said apocalypse. But yes, rant to the side, to those youngsters in our audience, YouTube before the adpocalypse was basically almost filter free when it comes to who gets to make cash out of a sizable digital following. If you were big enough, nobody gave a flying shit about what you were saying. They were throwing money at you. By they, I mean companies. But now corporate executives were reading the Wall Street Journal and texting their marketing interns on whether their fucking ads are playing on videos deemed too controversial. The magical question, what kind of videos are our ads playing on, would end up changing the whole ecosystem forever. A series of investigative pieces, starting with the Times in the UK and then picked up by The Guardian, revealed that major corporate advertisers were having their ads automatically placed to and on content promoting terrorism, hate speech, and the far looser term for defining at least extremism. We're talking AT&T, Verizon, Starbucks, McDonald's, the BBC, brands that had no idea their money-making name was being paired with stuff that could potentially blow up in their face, at least PR-wise. Within days, you had a mass exodus of advertisers pulling their budgets not just from YouTube, but from Google entirely. Analysts at the time estimated the boycott in the beginning could cost Google something in the range of $750 million just in the beginning. Absolute chaos. But who could have seen it coming, guys? Well, that's the thing. Everybody. YouTube had been receiving pressure from researchers, journalists, civil society organizations, anti-fascist content creators, and frankly, just ordinary users for years about the far-right pipeline on its platform. Years, and nothing meaningfully changed. The moment that actually forced Google to act wasn't moral pressure. It wasn't investigative journalism. It wasn't the countless people who had been harmed by this content. It was corporate advertisers threatening Google's bottom line. That's it. That's the whole story. YouTube is an advertising business that happens to host video. That's how you should always look at it. An advertising business that happens to host video. When the advertising revenue was at risk, of course they acted. When it wasn't, when you could have motherfuckers talking and spilling hatred without any potential pain point being felt on the line go up graph.
When David Duke, the Grand Wizard of the KKK, could have a YouTube channel.
Exactly. When it was just regular people getting funneled into white nationalism, that was apparently an acceptable externality until it cost them some money. And what did they do exactly? They tightened eligibility to the partner program in early 2018. They introduced what they called limited state demonetization, a kind of half measure where channels that were edging towards policy violations would have ads removed, but the channel itself would stay up. For a guy like Molyneux, who was absolutely playing this game, the platform became simultaneously more restrictive and more permissive in a weird way. He was getting demonetized on individual videos while still reaching hundreds of thousands of people. Now reaching them while being able to say that he's being censored and that they should check out their Patreon. YouTube was essentially saying, we will not pay you, but we will let you broadcast. Which frankly, when you're running a racket built on Patreon donations and listener support rather than AdSense, like we also are, check out the Patreon, by the way.
Great pivot. You agree? Yeah.
Subscribe!
The anti-fascist voices on the internet are being silenced. Be a true anti-fascist patriot. Buy our steroids and support us on Patreon. Now getting 50% discount on steroids by supporting us.
I got demonetized once, by the way, for using like footage of like the McCarthyist like Red Scare trials on YouTube. No joke. It's so fucking funny.
I have like 5 18+ videos where I am like criticizing a very bad thing.
Yeah, and they're like, you agree with this.
Yeah, I got in trouble for making fun of like COVID vaccine denialists, and they were like, "You're spreading COVID vaccine denial." I'm like, "No, I was laughing at them." What?
They're scared now.
Community guideline strike. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, they're scared now because you're talking about something sensitive. I mean, though that being said, I don't know how the fuck I did that, but I have like a fucking thumbnail with Adolf Hitler on it, and that video is completely fine. They don't care.
I have one with a massive SS and swastika in the middle of the screen. It is my best performing video of all time.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's the aesthetic of fascism, which that particular one, which if you just read the title, afterwards I changed a little bit for it to scream, this is a video that says fascism is bad,
Yeah.
because the algorithm loved it, because that's at least my interpretation, because that was the only video where in the title, I'm not saying fascism is bad. It just says, we're going to talk about fascism. And it's like, I love this! Yeah,
I think
like,
mine was the same way, because it said capitalism in the Third Reich, and it's a video, or it's a thumbnail where Adolf Hitler is hiling like a fucking like stock ticker going up.
There you go. That unironically, direct parallel.
Yeah, and some people might be like, oh shit, he's going to be talking about like how this is awesome. No.
Yep, the algo at least
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
I mean, the algo understands that a lot of people are going to think this is awesome. That's why it pushes blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. That's actually the algorithm would be a great episode on its own.
True, yeah.
And exactly all of this, guys, that we're talking about gets at a core contradiction of this adpocalypse era. The policy changes were framed as cleaning up the platform, but in reality, the algo that made people like Molyneux into stars in the first place, the recommendation engine that kept auto-playing ever more extreme content, the system that rewarded outrage and conspiratorial thinking because those things drove watch time, that didn't fundamentally change. This was documented for years. The content was somewhat restricted, sure, but the structural incentives that produced and promoted that content were largely intact. The funnel kept on growing, and so did the BBW. So, no, it wasn't a BBW. What was
BBL.
So the BBL. Yes, so the BBL. I mean, I don't mind the BBW either, brother.
If you're listening to this, please spam pictures of BBLs to Hugo so he understands what it is.
All the socials,
Yes.
yeah.
So yeah, in the context of the adpocalypse, Molyneux tried to keep going. By 2020, his channel did do still really well, 900,000 subscribers. But then on June 29th, 2020, in the middle of the George Floyd protests, in the middle of what was, at that time at least, before being to an extent co-opted, a moment of genuine national reckoning with racism in the United States, YouTube finally pulled the trigger. Molyneux's channel was terminated alongside David Duke and Richard Spencer as part of a wave of bans affecting over 25,000 channels for hate speech violations. They were scared in the corporate executive rooms of YouTube because they were seeing what is happening on the street. They were seeing a relative vibe shift in the United States of America on what is going to be casually accepted and what is not going to be casually accepted as hate speech, and they wanted to prevent another potential scandal like that of the previous adpocalypse. So please don't applaud them for this. They're just running the bottom line here, okay? The timing is very worth noting. YouTube had updated its hate speech policies back in 2019, specifically adding rules against content that very specifically and out in the open, keep in mind, portrays a group as inferior in order to justify discrimination. This is a very long sentence, keep in mind. Molyneux's entire intellectual project was built exactly on just saying that a bunch of times in every single video, podcast, and book. The pseudoscientific race and IQ stuff, the just philosophical inquiry into why some groups are supposedly less intelligent or civilized, this was his bread and butter. And to his demise, he was saying most of this shit at that point in his career out in the open. This is very important because YouTube didn't ban all the peddlers of hatred. One could argue it only banned 1% of them. Like the Daily Wires, the PragerUs, and the Jordan Petersons of the time. They fucking flourished. No. They cut down on those stupid enough, or I guess honest and principled enough, to depict their violent bigotry out in the open. The rest were bundled into political content, which was supposed to be seen as neither here or there. YouTube, my friends, incentivized the digital right to adjust the way they pitch their ideas, because the only way you could actually get banned is if you were unironically saying "Hi Hitler" N-word and Zeke Heiling on screen, which in one way or another was what Stephen Molyneux did. The smarter guys continued to exist and even thrive. But yeah, how did Molyneux take all of this? He called it an egregious error and a systemic, coordinated effort.
That's the one time he starts thinking about systemic things.
Dum, 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 dum. He described his channel as, quote, and here I'm quoting, the, quote, systemic coordinated effort, end quote. He described his channel as, quote, the largest philosophy conversation the world has ever known, end quote, which is a sentence that really speaks for itself. Okay, fucking Socrates dropped in here.
Yep.
God damn it. By September 2020, he'd been banned from PayPal, MailChimp, SoundCloud, and YouTube. And I have to say, if I got banned from PayPal and I had the ego of this guy, I would genuinely start tinfoiling and living in bunkers, because that is pretty crassy.
Does anyone know what the fuck MailChimp is?
Back in the day, there was surveying and sending out mail. So he had a lot of RSS feeds.
Oh,
right?
okay,
So he was talking to a lot of like older heads via mail, right? So this was a big part of his platform. So getting banned from that was a big deal for him. So his financial infrastructure was basically gone. His distribution funnels were gone. And for someone who had built an entire empire precisely on those platforms, it looked at the time like a meaningful reckoning. But then came Elon Musk. In January 2023, following Musk's acquisition of Twitter, Stephen Molyneux's account was reinstated. Is his return plausible, or has his time in the digital mainstream passed? Has the right moved on, or will it, as it grows more honest in its thirst for violence, re-embrace one of its founding fathers? I mean, mothers. He would hate that more. Only time will tell.
I do want to point out that, hilariously enough, the one thing that Stefan Molyneux, the first thing he said when he had his first appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast, when Joe Rogan literally was just in a room with like a table, like a round table, sitting next to him. The first thing...
Yeah, and now he's just in a room with a square table.
Yeah, but yeah, and like the fucking like curtains from like the Red Room in like Twin Peaks or whatever the fuck. But anyways, like the first thing he brought up when he stepped into Joe Rogan's podcast was that everyone mispronounces his name. And I noticed that we have found many innovative ways to mispronounce his name, and I hope to God he listens to the podcast.
Oh yeah, Stefan Molyneux.
Yeah, because you called it Steven. Yeah, and Stefan. Yeah, it's awesome.
Did I call him Steven? Okay, who gives a fuck?
No, you didn't. Hugo did. You called him like Molyneux. Something he says is like a mispronunciation, but maybe I'm also mispronouncing it, which would be even funnier, I guess.
Anyway, eat shit, stay banned, fuck you.
Stefan Molyneux is a pioneer and a monster, but he's not a unique monster. There are countless ones like him out there who peddle a right-wing ideology steeped in pseudoscience, destroying young people's lives before they've barely begun. But I want to leave us off on a bittersweet note, because among the countless lives Stefan has ruined, at least some managed to build themselves back. I mentioned a woman named Colleen Cowgill who had managed to leave Molyneux's cult. In 2008, she had left Ohio to live with her boyfriend in Atlanta, cutting all contact with her family, as Stefan had required. However, quoting Colleen Cowgill, I found out later that they hired a private investigator to find out my address so they could send birthday cards. Stefan tried to convince her this family had abused her. Then his cult convinced her that her boyfriend wasn't living up to their libertarian virtues. So she was convinced to break up with him, which left her isolated and alone. Eventually, she made her way back to her family in Ohio, and according to the Real Life magazine article from 2017, was doing a PhD in psychology. I was able to find a Dr. Colleen Cowgill at Ohio University, whose listed fields of expertise include psychology of religion and social influence. Thank you for listening.